Anirudh, appreciate you taking out the time and speaking with us. Well, we've all studied history. We've all, fleetingly, if I can say now, studied about the Chola dynasty. But do you think enough is done when it comes to celebrating the contribution of this great dynasty and how still the resonance and the echo of the great work they did prevails?
Just 1 second.
Hi, Devanit. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And that's an interesting question. As you said, I think that to a lot of us, the Cholas are a footnote that we come across perhaps in our history textbooks, perhaps we read an article or two about them online. But frankly, I think that the Cholas were one of the most remarkable and really one of the most global of all of medieval India's superpowers. I think that in particular, their wide, expansive trade networks that extended not just towards the east, but also deep towards the west. There's an increasing body of evidence showing, for example, that for their remarkable bronzes, which perhaps are the most famous of all Chola art objects, some of the metals, which included tin and copper, were coming from potentially as far away as Spain and Sicily. It's a new archaeometallurgical discovery. And in addition to that, it's really under Chola power that you begin to see a wide expansion of Tamil, the first emergence of Tamil, I believe, as an international language. It is spoken not just in India, but also in Sri Lanka. And there's a lot of evidence that it was potentially spoken as far away as Java, where Tamil merchants worked as tax collectors. We know that the Cholas engaged in wide-ranging diplomacy, really reminiscent of contemporary India's look east policy. In fact, we know that the Cholas exchanged embassies with Burma. We know they exchanged embassies with the kings of present-day Cambodia. So just in terms of their sheer global span, but also in terms of their deep and lasting effects on Indian society, some of the most iconic of South Indian temples, which today attract millions of pilgrims, and I would say are perhaps among the most devout places on earth, places that have been considered holy for centuries upon centuries, really were established under Chola power. It's really under Chola power that they received their first infusions of patronage. It's then that South Indian temples began to emerge into the great towns that they are today. Many of the most iconic examples of South Indian architecture, including the famous Gopurams, really arose in the Chola period. So I really think that a deeper understanding of Chola history really deepens the understanding not just of South India's history, but really of the world's history, and helps us better understand the way that India interacted with the rest of the Indian Ocean world once you take the longer perspective on them.
Right. And Anirudh, do you think that there's this ongoing debate about what Indian history we grew up talking about and grew up listening to vis-a-vis this mass volumes of history that have been obscure, or rather deliberately made obscure from us because of whatever political motivations and other reasons. Do you think that the Chola dynasty was also a sufferer in this kind of a predicament?
Well, I think the answer is multidimensional. I do understand why the earliest generation of textbook setters in the aftermath of partition in a country that is so vast, so diverse, and still healing from the wounds that were inflicted by the British during the freedom struggle. I understand why there's a tendency to think of India's history as primarily focused in North India and the Gangetic Plains. But I think that in the 21st century, we are more than mature enough and really more than curious enough as a society to really need to understand how all of India's regions, not just South India, mind you, but even the history of, for example, Odisha, the history of Northeast India, very rarely feature in our understanding of how India came to be India. And I completely agree that regional histories need to play more of a role in our understanding of the past. And I think especially that as a South Indian myself, I really believe that South India's history needs to have much more attention. And I think it's important to understand history not just in terms of dynasties and which king came after which king, but really to understand more deeply how is it that history, how is it that the different kingdoms, the different regions shaped how India came to be India today.
For the uninitiated, how would you describe the Chola Empire in terms of the contribution that they have provided to our country, and of course, the kind of modern outlook they had even at that time?
I think that the Cholas really are one of the most remarkable dynasties, not just in Indian history, but really in global history. If you were to look at the early 9th century, which of course Kamini has written about in so much detail in a wonderful book, you'll see the Cholas were not just kings who ruled over subjects. They actually worked with a large number of village assemblies, a very diverse kind of society where many people, not just kings, we're also talking about merchants, for example, were powerful. And the Cholas had this extremely innovative way of using temples and temple economies to integrate diverse sections of society and use that to mobilize astonishing amounts of resources. You were mentioning earlier, for example, Vineet, the great Chola temples, the Vidishwara temples, the Airavateshwara temples. Each of these Chola temples required the mobilizations of hundreds of thousands, lakhs of tons of stone. And the Chola state usually built these temples within 10, 15 years. So can you imagine the kind of organizational skills that you would require to be mobilizing thousands of tons of stone, collecting thousands of tons of rice in revenue, and also sending out armies of thousands of people, equipping them with high quality carbon steel swords, to be equipping them with food and resources, and also directing them strategically into different regions. They're really, I think, a truly extraordinary medieval power. And the more that I understand them, the more I read their inscriptions, the more I begin to understand these people as personalities. I really think that they're some of the most extraordinary Indians of the last 1,000 years.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.